Welcome to the HTML5 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host. And in this tutorial, we're going to continue on with our 2D, 3D transforms with part 3 of the series. And we're going to look at 3D transforms. So CSS3 allows you to format your elements using 3D transformations. Though not fully implemented across all browsers, 3D support is coming along quite well, and it's a good idea to get a handle on how this will be implemented so that you can begin to develop your strategy for deployments of these new techniques across your websites. In part 3 of the series, we'll be looking at the following methods. We're going to look at the rotateX method, which defines a 3D rotation along the x-axis. We're going to look at the rotateY method, which defines a 3D rotation along the y-axis. We're going to look at the rotateZ method, which defines a 3D rotation along the z-axis. And we're also going to look at perspective, which defines a perspective view for a 3D transformed element. So those are the four we're actually going to cover in this particular part of the series. And so let's go ahead and move into our development environment and demonstrate what we've been discussing in our presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and drop out of our presentation and get into our development environment. I'm going to confirm that we've got our Apache server up and running. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Google Chrome, which will be the browser I'll be using for this demonstration, and my Sublime Text 2 text editor. And I've already got my start file loaded, my html_start.html. So the first thing I want to do is we're actually going to look at the rotateX method will be the first one we're going to demonstrate. And the rotateX method rotates an element around its x-axis at the given degree that we put into our coding when we actually set the parameter for the rotateX method. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as example1.html. And then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and start putting in some of our code. Let me go ahead and add the sections I want for our body elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is come down to the body element. Actually, I do want to put an H1 here. Just call this the rotateX method. And go ahead and close out that H1. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in a section in here. And this section is basically the normal section. If you've been following along the tutorials, we're setting it up basically the same way we've been doing all the other ones. I'm going to have a normal section that's has none of these changes or transformations applied to it, so that you'd actually see what the normal one looks like as compared to what our new one's going to look like. Let me go ahead and save all our changes. Refresh our browser window. Let's go back and load number 1. You can see the changes that we've made. Now what I want to do is I actually want to go in and put in a couple sections that we're going to work with. So I'm going to put in my section that I'm actually going to do the rotation on. And this is my section I give it in a class of rotateX. And the rotateX method rotates an element around its x-axis at a given degree. This section element is rotated. And I think I'm going to start out the rotation at about 140 degrees. Then we're going to do some other demonstrations so you can see what I mean by the x-axis. And then I'm just going to put in a side right below this, just to make a note so that you're aware that Internet Explorer 9 and earlier does not support these methods. So I'm going to save those changes, bring it back up in our browser window. And again, it's just a note telling you that Internet Explorer 9 and earlier versions do not support the rotateX method inside of their browsers with that MS Web rendering engine. So you can see what we've actually put on the screen. I've actually added a couple sections to our body element and then the side. We're actually going to be working with the center section. We've given it a class name of rotateX. Let me go ahead and scroll up just a little bit. Now would be a good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type all this in. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into my head section. I want to add a couple of style tags. So I'm going to open up my style tag. I'm going to come down a couple lines and close my style element. And what I want to do now is let's go ahead and add some styling for our sections. And again, very similar to the previous tutorials, I'm going to go ahead and add some styling for all the sections so they actually stand out so you can see what we're doing here. And again, I'm setting up my section with a width of 350 pixels, giving it a height of 100 pixels, a background color of aqua, and then I'm going to put a gray border around it just like we've done in the previous demonstrations so that as we put this rotateX into this transform, as we actually start transforming this section element, you'll be able to see, based on the background color and the outline, exactly what we're doing to it. So let's go ahead and save that, refresh our browser window. Now you can see those two sections with that background element. Let me go ahead. There's a good time for the pause if you want to go ahead and type that in. Now I want to actually go ahead and add the styling for the rotateX. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. I'm going to come right below that section element. I'm going to put this in place, and hang on, let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. And you'll notice I've got my section with the class of rotateX, and I'm doing a transform colon rotateX, and I'm starting out with 140 degrees. That is our standard syntax. That would be the last one in the list if we actually were putting the fallback syntax in there. But this is the standard syntax. It's transform colon rotateX, and then inside the parentheses I have the degrees that I actually want to rotate it. If I save the change, refresh the browser window, you'll actually see the rotation occur. Keep in mind now it's rotating on the center x-axis. And to make that a little more evident, let's go ahead and make this 85 degrees, and you'll see what I mean. Because as it's rotating on the center x-axis, it's actually rotating out of view. If I were to make this 90 degrees, you wouldn't even see it because there's no depth to the object. And it would be basically, we'd be looking at it straight on, flat away. And that's why you can't see anything there with a 90-degree rotation. If I were to make it 91 degrees, you'll see it just begin to appear as it rotates down. And again, if I were to make it 100 degrees, I'm just changing this. I'm just giving you the idea of how this is rotating on that axis. You can actually see it rotating on the x-axis as it goes through. 180 degrees. Should be straight up and down because now we've rotated it 180 degrees, so it's actually straight up and down. If I were to make it 270, again, you should not see anything because it's going to be just the opposite of the 90. So if I save the change at 270 degrees, again, flat, you're looking straight through it because again, it's rotated. But if I were to make it 271, it'll begin to come up the other side just as we would expect it to. So if I were to make it 300, because remember we have a circle, 0 to 360 degrees, and now you can see it's starting to come back up because it's rotating again around that x-axis. Good time to pause if you want to type that in. One other thing I do want to point out, we actually do have fallback code for this for Safari. So let me go ahead and show you what that fallback would be. Because Safari is not supporting this as we had thought. So I've got this WebKit transform rotateX, and again, it's very similar to what we had done in the previous exercises, but that would be the fallback code for the Safari rendering engine or the WebKit rendering engine, which is what is currently in use in Safari. Again, as before, I'm going to go ahead and pull this back out because I want to show you as before, we have full browser support with all our newest browsers. So if I were to, right now I've got it up in Google Chrome, that's the one we're using by default. If I were to bring it up in Opera, let's go back and grab example 1. So you can see it's working well in Opera. If I were to bring it up in Internet Explorer, let's go ahead and refresh example 1 in Internet Explorer. Make sure I'm actually on example 1. There we go. You can see that it's doing the same thing in Explorer. And if I were to bring it up in Firefox, again, same thing. But again, with Firefox, keep in mind, again, with the size font, that default font's a little bit larger than our other browsers. But you can, again, get the concept that this is all working well. This rotateX works well across the platform with our newer browsers. The next one we're going to look at was we're going to look at the rotateY method for the 3D transformations inside of CSS3. All right, let me go ahead and get rid of some of these other browsers that we have up here. I'm going to go ahead and keep up my Google Chrome. That'll be the one we're going to use. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as on this. Let's go ahead and save this as example number 2. So again, if you have access to the exercise files, you'll have access to all of these. Now we're actually going to look at the rotateY method. The rotateY method rotates an element around its y-axis at a given degree. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull out this, actually I'm just going to go ahead and change this section to the Y rotate. And I'm going to change our header to the rotateY method, saving those changes. And then just come down here and go through our text, make sure that our text is this normal element. We're going to make this the rotateY class. Change the rotateY because we know it rotates on the y-axis. We'll go ahead and start this out with a 100-degree rotation. And again, same note for Internet Explorer. Let's go ahead and save those changes. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up. If you want to go ahead and pause, and put in the changes that we've made for the rotateY position. I'm going to make this 100 degrees, by the way. And we're actually going to demonstrate the rotateY. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type that stuff in. Then I'm going to go ahead and scroll down if you want to go ahead and get the HTML stuff typed in for the rotateY. I'm going to go ahead and update our browser window. Got to go ahead and actually load example number 2, and you'll see now that we've got the rotateY, and we're rotating instead of on the center axis like we were in the previous demonstration. Now we're on that up and down Y axis, and we're actually rotating on that axis itself. If we actually, let's go ahead and make this, let's make this 25 degrees. Save the change, refresh the browser window, because now you can just begin to see it rotating on that Y axis. And again, as I increase this in degrees, save the change, refresh the browser window, you'll see it starting to rotate more and more on that center axis until it's going to get to the point where actually it's going to be gone. And again, very similar to what we demonstrated in the last exercise with the 90 and 270. If I were to make this 90 degrees, because now we're actually looking at that axis up and down, or the Y axis itself, and again, it's going to appear to disappear because there is no depth to this. So if I were to make it 91 degrees, you'll actually see it start to reappear as it passes that center point. The same thing if I were to make it 89 degrees. Just before it disappears from the center point. And then we'd have the same effect, by the way, with 200. If I make it 180, it should be 180 degrees out of phase with the original. You can see everything is reversed because it's 180 degrees out of phase on the Y-axis with the original section that we actually set up originally. And again, if I were to make it 0, you would see it back in its normal stand, normal configuration, appearing just as it would have appeared without any rotateY on it whatsoever. So again, rotateY rotates on the Y-axis, rotateX rotates on the X-axis. This also has the fallback coding, very similar to what we had done in the previous demonstration. All we have to do is come here, and again, also supported in all our browsers. We'd actually put in our WebKit rendering engine here with transform, rotateY, and then the number of degrees. I could actually come in, and again, it's supported with all our browsers. I'm going to go ahead and put 45 degrees back in there, save it, refresh the browser. If I were to come up and bring this up now in Opera, let's go ahead and get example number 2. You can see again, Opera supports it. Could come up and bring it in Internet Explorer. Let's go ahead and load example number 2. Internet Explorer is supporting it, and Firefox will do the same. We're going to go ahead and load example number 2. And again, it's supported in Firefox. Again, keeping in mind that we are seeing a difference in the fonts that are used between Firefox and the other browsers that we're actually demonstrating with. The next one we're going to look at is actually the rotateZ property inside of CSS3 that allows us to transform our Z-axis. And the Z-axis, again, works very similar to the X and Y. It's just going to rotate on the Z-axis instead of the X and Y axis. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and demonstrate the rotateZ method. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as example number 3. And I'm going to go ahead and change some of this code. Let's go ahead and make this a Z. We'll make it 90 degrees. And we're actually going to demonstrate the rotateZ method. So I'm going to change that title to a Z. And then obviously we want to do the rotateZ for the actual command. Let's go ahead and save those changes. I'm going to go back and come into our document for example number 3. And now what we want to do, obviously, we're going to want to change all these to make this our rotateZ also, just so it reflects accurately what we're doing. We want to change the class to rotateZ so it actually picks it up inside of our demonstration. Save the change, refresh the browser window. Now we should actually see this rotate on that Z axis, and you'll notice now that we're 90 degrees. And based on how we have this set, again, just like all the previous exercises, we can change the settings to rotate this any particular way that we want on that Z axis. And you'll notice it's almost like it's on a pivot point. Let's go ahead and make it 27 degrees. It's almost like it's on a pivot point in the center of this particular point where it tends to be rotating from. And we can also go negative as well as positive, as we've demonstrated in previous exercises. So again, very, very functional the way that we're doing this. Let's go ahead and put this on the Z-axis. I just noticed that was not correct. So in the event you have copies of the files, you can actually have copies of these exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and scroll back up. So if you want to pause and type in these changes, now would be a good time to pause. And then I'm going to scroll down if you want to go ahead and type the changes into the HTML. So you'll have those changes. And like our previous exercise, we actually can do the fallback coding in this one also. The WebKit is the fallback. So if we want to do fallback for here, we'd actually do the WebKit. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. It is available in all the current browsers, but we do have WebKit as one of the fallbacks for the Safari browser, because again, Safari is not supporting this in their browsers. And let's go back and put this back into 90 degrees. And what I'll do is let's save it at the 90-degree point, refresh the browser, and then we'll go ahead and check it in the other browsers. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Opera first. Let's go back and load the exercise 3. You'll see that it is working the same in Opera. I'll go ahead and bring up Internet Explorer. Again, let's go back and bring up example number 3. You'll see it is working in Internet Explorer also. And the same thing with Firefox. I'll go ahead and bring in Firefox. Let's go back, load up example 3. And again, you'll see that we actually have it loading in Firefox. So it's performing exactly as it should perform in the recent browsers. We do have fallback coding if you need it. So we've actually looked at the rotateZ. The last one I want to look at inside this particular tutorial is I actually want to look at perspective, because perspective defines a perspective view for the 3D transform element, and it actually gives us quite a bit of functionality as how we actually are going to perceive this element in 3D. And that's going to be the next demonstration. All right, so now let's look at the perspective method. I'm going to do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as example number 4 again, so that you'll have copies of all these if you have access to the exercise files. I'm going to go ahead and remove the code. This is going to be this one will be significantly different than the ones we've been doing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all the code. Let's go ahead and save all those changes, go back, and let's go ahead and load up example number 4. And we should have nothing on our screen. What we want to do now is we're going to do the perspective method demonstration. So I'm just going to go ahead and save those changes. That's just for our actual title bar. So we get the perspective method on the top. I'm going to go ahead and add some HTML inside of our body element so we can demonstrate this, and it's going to be using the perspective method. You'll notice I've opened up a section, and inside that section I've actually put in a div with a class of per, and that's just for perspective, and I've just got some text in there called the new look, and that's just so that you can actually see this as we change the perspective of it. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes, refresh my browser window, just so you can see what we actually have in the browser. Now would be a good time to pause if you want to type that in. Now I'm going to go ahead and enter the first portions of our CSS3, or the first portions of our styling inside my style tags. I'm going to just come down a couple lines, and I'm actually going to format the styling of the section itself. We're going to give it a position, a relative, then I'm going to give it a width and a height. I'm going to set up a margin, a padding. I am going to give it a 1 pixel solid black border again, so you can see the perspective in there. And I'm actually going to use the perspective inside this section and set it at 150 pixels. And you'll see what I mean by that as soon as we get into this. Let's go ahead and save the changes, refresh our browser window, and now you can actually see that we've got this square set up that makes up this particular section. And you can see our text in there for our div. And now what I want to do is I actually want to go in and format how we're going to set up the div to actually make this, give it a perspective as compared to that section. Good time to pause if you want to go ahead and type in that styling for the section element. I'm going to go ahead and grab my styling for my per class, because you'll notice I've got a per class down here that I've actually assigned to this div. That's how we're going to send it, or that's how we're going to pull this out and style it separately. And you'll notice I'm giving that a padding of 50 pixels, a position of absolute. Keep in mind now it's in relationship to its parent, and the section element is the parent element. I'm giving it a 1 pixel solid gray border, giving it a background color, and now I'm telling it to transform and rotate on the x-axis 45 degrees. And you'll see that by using the perspective and that transform rotateX, we're actually going to give this an interesting perspective inside of our window. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser window, and now you'll see what we mean by using this perspective right here. And in combination with the transform, what we can actually do with this, we're actually giving it that rotate of 45 degrees. And again, we can adjust this to anything we want to. And it will change the way that appears inside of our screen. But you can actually see that we're getting this perspective now inside of our browser window. Very, very cool. There's a lot of cool new methods inside of CSS3. And you're going to see how when we put all these together, which the next tutorial is going to be, we're going to put a lot of this stuff together to make a three-dimensional carousel. So you can actually see how we could have a menu selection that would actually work as if it were a carousel. It's going to take a little while, but I think that would be a cool tutorial to kind of wrap this up and give you an idea of how all these work together. So now you've seen we've used the perspective. We've actually used the rotateZ method, the rotateY method, and the rotateX method. So this tutorial, we've wrapped that thing up with a rotateX method, a rotateY method, rotateZ method, and then we closed it out with using this new perspective method inside CSS3. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.